Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Very good. Very nice. So, when we are in the presence of one divine sage, one Sadguru, Sadacharya, one true teacher, when we are in the presence of such a being, if we're open to experiencing who that being is, we have the understanding that that being is as heavy as the entire universe combined. What does guru mean? It means heavy. That person is more heavy than the entire universe combined. That may seem like a radical statement, but it's not. What does the universe weigh? This is a trick question, so don't answer it. I know you know the physics answer. What does the universe weigh in reality? Nothing, because it's Maya. It's Maya. In comparison to that which is truly real, in actuality, it weighs nothing. What does any material thing weigh? Well, you can weigh it at a given moment, but you can weigh any particular thing at any particular moment, and it will have some weight to it, but will that weight remain the same? Of course not. The weight will vary in accordance with what particular time you weigh it. If you weigh it a moment before it's about to be reduced to nothing, it's not going to weigh much, and then eventually it will weigh nothing. This chair won't be here, then it will weigh nothing. This body won't be here, it will weigh nothing. The perfect diet plan. Temporality. Thus, the guru weighs more than the entire universe, because what is the guru? The guru represents the real. The guru represents that which truly has existence, that is consciousness. This is the power of the presence of one such divine being. Imagine the power of 10,000 such beings, of myriad numbers of such beings. When we think about enlightened beings, when we think about beings who have achieved liberation, the truth of the matter is there are more living beings within the spiritual realm than there are in all of the material realm combined, in all of the universes combined. Imagine the power of the spiritual weight of such beings. With that understanding now, let's go into the second chapter of Narada Bhakti Sutras, and then you'll see what I was just talking about. We're going to begin with the second chapter and verse 1 of Narada Bhakti Sutras, which begins on the version that I have on page 3. The characteristics of devotional consciousness, of bhakti, are described variously by authoritative sages. Ekam sadvipra bahudha vadanti. This is a verse from Rig Veda. Ekam sadvipra bahudha vadanti. Very important verse. And if we understand that verse, we will more greatly understand this verse and vice versa. Because again, there is a plurality of sages. There isn't one sage. There is a plurality of acharyas, not one. There is a plurality of gurus, not one. This being the case, different gurus will approach truth, will approach God in different ways. However, being sages, being living beings who have enlightenment and who know truth and know it well, know it perfectly, does this mean that their opinions conflict with one another? No. No. So again, ekam sadvipra bahudha vadanti. It says in the Rig Veda that God is one, even though sages will name that God variously. Now, unfortunately, in the last 150 years or so, people have thoroughly misunderstood this verse to be a type of radical universalism. That is saying that regardless of a sage's opinion, even if they conflict with one another, etc. Even if sages say things that are contradictory to one another, well, all paths are one, all paths are the same, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let me repeat this. It doesn't matter. This is radical universalism. Let me ask, intuitively, if we're talking about spirituality and the conclusion of one individual is about anything with spirituality, X doesn't matter, what's the problem there? Intuitively, it pains our heart to even hear such a thing, that X does not matter. Oh, what path are you following? It does not matter. What is your conception of the absolute? It doesn't matter. They're all valid, they're all one, they're all the same. In actuality and spirituality, everything matters. In fact, when an individual becomes a sage, it comes to the point where you understand that every single leaf falling from every single tree in existence matters. It all has meaning. Do we want a life devoid of meaning or with meaning? Thus, it matters. It matters. So, when we hear that verse from Rig Veda, but also this verse that Narada is saying, the characteristics of devotional consciousness are described variously by authoritative sages. What is being said here is not that different sages have differences of opinion that conflict with one another. Oh, one person says that devotional consciousness is offering obeisances to God. Another sage says that devotional consciousness is making a perfect chocolate sundae. Another sage says that the characteristics of devotional consciousness are a blue cow, etc., and any silly statement. No. What we will see very, very quickly is that these sages that he is going to talk about in these preceding verses talk about different aspects of spirituality, none of which conflict with one another, but which comprise a whole. You see, in order to understand both this verse as well as the famous verse from the Rig Veda that I've quoted now, we need to understand that truth is like a diamond with an infinite number of facets. Different people can look into one facet or another facet or another facet, but they're all looking at a diamond, the same diamond. You see, that's the proper understanding of both the Rig Vedic verse and this verse. What is radical universalism? It is eradicating the diamond altogether and saying that, well, one sage is looking at the diamond, which is God. Another sage is looking at, again, a hooting owl. Another sage is looking at a blank screen. Another sage is, etc., etc., etc. The point is the diamond. That is God. You see? Very good. So with that understanding that Narada is not talking about radical universalism, but is talking about something much deeper than this, let's go on to verse 16. Vyasa, the son of Parashara, teaches that devotional consciousness consists of a fondness of ritual worship of God and so forth. All right, we'll stop there. So first he is explaining the Siddhanta, the teachings of one very great Acharya, of one very great Guru, one very great Rishi, and this is Vyasa. Who is Vyasa? Vyasa is one of the most important of sages. More, Vyasa is the son of Parashara, who is himself a very great sage. He himself is a Muni. In fact, he's famous for several things, one of which is describing the 6 qualities of Bhagavan. These 6 qualities that are very important, that we won't go into depth here because I gave a talk once that lasted for an hour where we talked about those 6 qualities, and we don't have that much time. But more, Vyasa is also the disciple of Narada, interestingly. And a lot of people forget this. Vyasa himself is one of the greatest sages. He is the compiler of the Vedas, not the author of the Vedas. Sometimes people make that mistake. He is the compiler of the Vedas. It's because of him that we have the Vedas in the form that they are now, but they pre-existed him. They were just in a different form. It was one Veda, but then he divides them. He is the author of the Puranas, he's the author of Brahma Sutras, etc. So this is not some spiritual lightweight that we're talking about. This is someone who is a truly magnificent sage. So, according to Vyasa, what does he say? Devotional consciousness is a fondness of ritual worship of God, and so forth. So this was his emphasis, the ritual worship of God. What does that mean? Doing puja, doing yajna, etc. And this certainly is one way in which we know the divine, one way in which we express bhakti, or devotion. You've heard me talk about this many times. When Savitri just did this wonderful puja, when any of us do puja, what are we doing? Is it just an empty ritual? Is it something in which it's just some sort of superstition? Well, we just have some statue in front of us and we're just doing some sort of empty ritual, offering things without any understanding. Well, unfortunately for a lot of people, that is what puja is. But that's not what puja is meant to be. Rather, puja is meant to be done with complete devotion in such a way that, done with devotion as a devotional practice, it awakens devotion within us. It awakens our inherent bhakti. You see, there is bhakti in several forms. There is bhakti in the form of a process, and upaya, a means. Bhakti as a sadhana, as something that we do. But then there is also innate bhakti. There is that bhakti, that devotion that is there within our consciousness, innate to who we are as an eternal living being. So we do bhakti to awaken bhakti. So puja is one way in which we do this. Thus, as we're doing puja, so for, again, an example, what we just did a short time ago, what's the idea? The idea is that as various things are being offered, we do this as a meditation, fully focusing our awareness on the fact that these wonderful things, see, it's not just anything being offered. It's not a 1966 copy of TV Guide, a collector's edition, but still worthless, really, to God. What is being offered? Things that have meaning, things that are wonderful. The incense, the fragrance of the incense represents the earth. The water itself represents water. The light that we're offering, the little lamp, represents light itself, etc. They all are symbolic. They all are full of meaning. So as we are offering these things, of course, what do? We have devotion. We cultivate that devotion that is there within us. We try to remember that devotion that is there naturally within us. So that's one process. Let's go on now to verse 17. Gargamuni, another great sage, another great saint, a rishi. Gargamuni teaches that devotional consciousness consists of listening to and engaging in divine narrations about God. Divya Katha, divine narrations. Who was Gargamuni? Actually, let me ask, does anyone know who is Gargamuni? You read Krishna book? He's in Krishna book.
Isn't he an astrologer?
Not even secondary, tertiary. Yeah, but that's not the main thing that he was. What was his relationship to Krishna specifically? He and Krishna knew each other.
He is a priest?
Yes, he was a priest. Also, he was Krishna's official guru. It's the Vedic system. Yes, it's the Vedic system that when you reach a certain age, you go to the Gurukula. As a child, you go and you study under a guru. So even when Krishna was here, fulfilling the role of a human being, he went and he had his guru. But this was an official guru. This was a guru when he was a child. So what we would call a teacher, kind of like kindergarten through 12th grade, kind of a teacher. So not necessarily a spiritual guru, even though in this case, Gargamuni was both. He was both a rishi, so certainly he was a very advanced spiritual being, but more the relationship that he had with Krishna was that he was his childhood teacher. So he taught him everything. He taught him how to read, how to write, mathematics, everything that you would learn in a Gurukula, and of course spiritual lessons as well. So what is the significance of this? This Gargamuni also is not just anybody. This is someone who had a relationship with Krishna, a relationship with God in such a way that he performed the role of God's guru when God is here as a child. That's an amazing thing. So again, this is not just anyone who is saying this. Let's read this verse again now. Now understanding the significance of this person, how he's not just anybody. Gargamuni teaches that devotional consciousness consists of listening to and engaging in divine narrations about God. Divya Katha, divine stories. This is another path through which we cultivate devotion. Divya Katha, listening to all of these wonderful pastimes about Krishna, about Rama, about all the avatars who come to earth, hearing divine pastimes that are there in the Puranas and so many scriptures. People will ask, why so many stories? We know that there are so many stories about the gods and goddesses, so many stories about sages, about rishis, about all the avatars who come to earth. Some of these stories sound fantastic and amazing and wonderful, and you wonder, how could this even be? How could it even be that Krishna did so many things? How could it be that Krishna, being very young, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old, something like that, when Indra wanted to punish the residents of Vrindavana, he begins to pour down rains and thunderstorm. And this little boy tells all the residents of Vrindavana, oh, don't worry. Just come to me. Let's go toward Govardhan Hill. And this little boy takes not his full hand, not even his full hand. He wants to accentuate this, you see, who he is. He takes his weakest finger, his pinky, and he takes a hill, almost a small mountain, Govardhana, and he lifts it over his head. And all the residents of Vrindavana and even their cows and livestock go under it and have shelter from the storm. This is Divya Katha. This is a divine narration, a divine story. And there are thousands of such stories. What is the point, however, of these stories? If we listen to them, and if we listen to them openly, if we listen to them in such a way that we have faith and trust and we open ourselves to what these stories are trying to communicate to us, what happens? We have an experience. You see, we have an experience. So what happens is, in listening to these stories, these divine narrations, we have an experience that's not just here, not just intellectually. Can we learn philosophical things from these stories? Oh, absolutely. But more than that, to philosophically understand the omnipotence of God, that is something that we can very easily grasp intellectually. We can grasp it and we can affirm it verbally in a very simple sentence. Yes, God can do anything. That's it. But that's simply understanding intellectually. What does it mean that God can do anything? What does it mean to fully grasp this as an experience? When you hear these stories, then you begin to experience what it means that God can do anything. That God can appear in the form of a small boy. See, to even accentuate it more, he's not even fully grown. See, none of these stories, the things that happen, are not just by accident. This is not only great literature, it's perfect literature. That God can appear as a small boy, that in itself shows omnipotence, that God can do anything. But then, as a small boy, that he can lift a mountain to save his devotees, and even then, so effortless is it for him that symbolically he uses the smallest part of his body, just a pinky. So again, when we hear stories like this, and there are thousands of them, what do? They give us a greater experiential understanding of what is the nature of God. And then, even more, is only that even the end point? No. Now, having this experience of what truly is the magnificence of God, having this experience, what does that do? Because to simply have the experience itself is more powerful than merely an intellectual understanding. But even that's not enough. What that does is now it stirs up devotion. Devotion. How can we not be devoted to a God such that he has such abilities, but more, he has such mercy? that he would deign to come upon the earth and appear to our faulty eyes as a small boy, when in actuality he is the source of all universes. And more, what does he do? He saves his devotees. That's the whole point. All the residents of Vrindavan are panicking and they're in fear because it's raining, and Indra is trying to punish them because he's foolish, he's an illusion. For that moment, he's an illusion. And what do? They turn to Krishna, and what does he do? He saves them. So this also gives us an illustration of the mercy, the compassion of God, of the divine, that as long as we take shelter of the divine, we're taken care of. We're taken care of. We are protected. Let's go on to verse 18. Shandilya. Shandilya holds that devotional consciousness results from achieving freedom from all things that obstruct one from delighting in the true self, in Atman. Shandilya. Now, who is he? Since Narada is such a great sage, that he is quoting these other sages is of significance. So if he's quoting someone, you want to know, who is that person? Who is that person? He's not just quoting anyone. Shandilya. So, what are we studying right now? What's the name of this book? Narada Bhakti Sutras. There is another book, Shandilya Bhakti Sutras, that we're not studying right now. Maybe in the future we'll do that. But Shandilya is another rishi, he's another sage, he's another author. He's written several books, including the Shandilya Bhakti Sutras, a book similar to this, just a little bit different emphasis. Of the two, Narada Bhakti Sutras is universally recognized as the more important of the two, talking about bhakti. But Shandilya Bhakti Sutras also is very, very interesting. Again, maybe in the future we'll look at that book as well. He is himself an expert on bhakti, as are all of these sages. He also, however, is very much an Ashtanga yogi. Shandilya. This is something very few people know about Shandilya. There is an entire Upanishad called the Shandilya Upanishad. It's one of the 108 Upanishads. How many people know that? It is named after the sage because it contains his teachings, actually. And when you look at this book, which is size-wise a medium-sized Upanishad, it's not the smallest, it's not the biggest. But when you look at this book, the entire thing is about yoga, the entire system of yoga, and it goes very in-depth. It is about Ashtanga yoga, very specifically. It talks about the 8 limbs of yoga, which Shandilya describes in the Shandilya Upanishad. He even describes several of the asanas, something that Patanjali doesn't really do. But in this case, the Shandilya Upanishad, Shandilya mentions 10 or 12 important asanas that he recommends, that he says that yogis must know. And yes, you're going to learn all those asanas, because again, the yoga that we teach comes from the Upanishads. Mm-hmm. So at some point when we do more asanas, you're going to learn those asanas actually. But this is who Shandilya is. He is a yogi, but he's also a bhakta. All right? So just a little background on him. Now let's just read this one more time. Shandilya holds that devotional consciousness results from achieving freedom from all things that obstruct one from delighting in the true self. This is actually how the Sanskrit works. It's very interesting. It's very beautifully stated. But let's unpack this a little bit. All right, so what's the facet of the diamond of bhakti through which he is peering? So, again, keeping in mind that he is a yogi, he speaks about bhakti from a yogic perspective. That is, understanding what is Atman. First of all, understanding Atman, Atman realization, Atma-jnana. Then, understanding what is one of the most important qualities of Atman, and that is bliss, thus delighting in true self, in Atman. But more, he talks also about the sadhaka, about the individual doing sadhana, from the perspective of an individual who is in illusion and must free themselves from illusion. You see? So again, let's look at this a little bit. What is devotional consciousness? It results from achieving freedom. Okay? So if you need to achieve freedom, that means you're in bondage, obviously. So again, This is talking about the individual as he is currently in Maya, as he is currently in illusion. So it results from achieving freedom from all things that obstruct. Let's stop there. From all things that obstruct. Now, what are the things that obstruct us from realizing that bliss of Atman? What are these things that literally kind of obstruct us? We want to know that. We want to realize this bliss that's there inherent in who we are as consciousness, but yet we can't. Sometimes we can, right? When we're deep in meditation, there's certain different spiritual experiences that we'll have where we will feel that bliss. But for the most part, for most people, that's obstructed. What are those things that are obstructing? Well, we know. False ego, anger, lust, greed, all of these various things that we have within us as living beings, not just human beings, but as living beings, where due to our illusion, we have this sense of separation between ourselves and the divine, between ourselves and other beings, between ourselves and ourselves. It's fascinating. There is a seeming illusory separation between ourselves and ourselves. That is, between who we think we are and who we truly are. That's the disconnect. That's there. This is what we know, but this is just a different way of seeing it. How we ourselves are separated from ourselves. Why? Because we have misidentified. Because instead of saying, I am me, I am saying, I am me. You see? I'm identifying with something else. I'm convinced that cup, oh yeah, this is me. Here I am. Hey, stop touching me. So dense, so powerful is the illusion that, as silly as that seems, that's what we're doing. When we identify with anything that is temporal, when we say, I am such and such age, such and such gender, such and such ethnicity, such and such species, even. When we say, my parents are so-and-so, when we say, my job is such and such, and on, any temporal identification that we have steeped ourselves within, what are we doing? We are obscuring who and what we truly are. How do we know this? Very simply, because we know all these things are temporary. There was a time when we weren't these things. There will be a time that we're not these things. And many of these things can even change. We can change everything. Our age is changing all the time. All the time. How old are you? I'm such and such age. Really? Okay. Let me ask you again in 10 years. Etc., etc. We identify even with our family, even with our parents, but understanding punarjanma, understanding the concept of reincarnation, of transmigration, we understand how many parents have we had, how many children have we had, how many brothers and sisters and friends, etc., etc., etc. And more than this, truthfully, if we truly understand our own actual nature and the nature of other living beings, really is not everyone our family. Is not everyone our family. Even that little spark of consciousness that is there in a little kitten, that's there in a little bird chirping in the tree, is that not our family? Yeah. So, Shandilya here is taking a very yogic, very Vedantic, very philosophical approach to what is bhakti. So essentially, he is saying that when we achieve this, then what is the next stage? The next inevitable stage is bhakti. Now, let's go on to 19. Now, this verse is significant because now Narada gives his own, not opinion, actually. Some people would say opinion, but in actuality, he's giving his own perspective. See, all these perspectives are correct. Not because all perspectives are correct, but these perspectives are correct. Because, number one, these are sages. These are acharyas. That's the first thing. Also, they are all correct because, again, they're all looking at the same thing. They're all looking at what is bhakti, but just from different perspectives. But now he's giving his perspective. But I, Narada, hold that the essential characteristics of devotional consciousness are offering all of one's activities to the Supreme Godhead. And I love this. I translated this. I tried to translate this in such a way that it also conveys the mood and even the emotion of the Sanskrit. And experiencing extreme desolation in forgetting that Supreme Godhead. Desolation. That's the Sanskrit. So, who is Narada? We don't have to go too deeply into this because we've talked about this. We know that Narada is not just an ordinary sage. He is the sage of sages, Narada Muni. Even though most of the traditions, let's say most of the yogic and Vedantic and Vedic traditions that have come to the West, most of them rarely even talk about them. Most individuals in the West who have been practicing yoga, Vedanta, etc. for some time will only rarely have heard about him, and often just by name, maybe they'll have heard one story about him. But very few people in the West understand his significance. In India they do. Though they very much understand that he appears all the time. He is found all throughout the Vedic scriptures, and he always plays a very important role. But in the West, we don't know a lot about him. He is the sage of sages. And now, when he gives his opinion, even though he is humble enough to not state this, we have to conclude that because he is the greatest of these sages aforementioned, that this is Siddhanta. This is a conclusive statement on what is the nature of bhakti. So, let me read this again. But I, Narada, hold that the essential characteristics of bhakti are offering all of one's activities to the Supreme Godhead. Let's stop there. So, offering all of one's activities to the Supreme Godhead. What does this mean? Well, we can look at this too from several perspectives. We can look at this from the perspective, certainly, of sadhana, of karma yoga, the idea that with everything that we do, what are we doing if we're practicing karma yoga? What this means is that even with our mundane activities, in our mind, in our consciousness, as a meditation, we are always thinking, this is for you. This is for you. Now you see, when Narada here says we offer everything to God, what does that mean? Does that mean literally? Does that mean that there's a place that we go and we deposit our wealth there, and anything we produce, if we create any artwork, there's some temple we go to and there's kind of a little portal and we just take everything there. Oh, I don't need these clothes, take the clothes, take everything we have. No, of course not. Of course not. That's silly. We can enjoy the fruits of our labor. We can enjoy our money and all the things that we have, need, etc. That's not the point. The point is that this is karma yoga. That when we have these things and when we use them internally, as we are even using them, in fact, even as we are feeding ourselves, even as we're drinking water, as we're doing anything, we're thinking of the divine and we're thinking, yes, I am eating this food, but in actuality, I am offering this food to Agni in the belly, who then is giving it to you, O Narayana, O Vishnu, as an offering. We are thinking in every way that everything that we are doing is in actuality, in our mind, an offering to God. That's devotion. That's bhakti. Is bhakti static or active? That's a question for everyone.
Active.
Active. Now, what's meant by active? When we think of bhakti, yes, it is devotional consciousness. We need primarily to understand it in this way. That's why I translate bhakti as devotional consciousness. But it is also devotional service as well. It is also devotional service. It is also something that's active. To simply have a consciousness of devotion to God. Oh, I am so devoted to Krishna, and your heart is melting with love for Krishna. And then as you're in this state of deep meditation, Krishna himself comes up to you, and he comes to you as Bala Krishna, as a little boy, and he says, could I have some water? At that point, what do? At that point, you better open your eyes. At that point, your meditation itself, if you understand, has become living. Now the fruit of your meditation is here before you. And now what is your meditation? What is the very fruit of that meditation? You take some water and you say, Krishna, here, this is for you. Please take, please drink. At this point, When you're doing that, you open your eyes and physically you take water and you offer it to Krishna. What is that? Is that meditation? That is greater than any meditation that we can do that is conceptual and experiential alone, because now it is actual service. Now it is actual surrender to the divine. Now, let's talk about this other aspect of giving everything to God, and that is indeed self-surrender itself. Prapatti. What also is Narada saying here? What he is also saying here is that when we give everything to God, when we offer all things to God, remember the examples that I gave before? Oh yes, let me give my wealth to God. Imagining that you go to some temple, there's some sort of little portal, and you pour everything you have into there. Oh, let me give my wealth, let me give everything I own. Let me somehow grab my property and somehow shove it through that portal. Let me give my clothing. Using that as just an analogy, silly analogy, but analogy nonetheless that will work as illustrative for the point that we're making now. If I were to take my own body and put it in that portal, saying, my body, God, is for you, is that even expressing bhakti to its maximal degree? No, even that is not. Ultimately, what is expressing bhakti to the maximal degree that is possible in any way? It's surrender of self. Surrender of self. Atma nivedana. Atma nivedana. Surrender of Atman, of self. What does it mean to give to God? Ultimately, what is wealth? Comes and goes, clothing, all these things that we talked about. What is the greatest thing that we can give to God? Do we really want to give to God things that are fleeting? No, we give to God ourselves, that greatest of all things, that is eternal. And how do we give to God? Well, that is the process of prapatti. That is the path of prapatti, prapatti marga. This is the path of complete self-surrender to God in such a way that in absolute devotion, there is nothing left that we can give. Now, when we surrender to God in such a way, does our self disappear into that black hole, into that portal in the temple where we put all of our things that we're giving to God? Again, just in a joking way. Do we lose ourselves when we give ourselves to God? No. 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 On the contrary. Because what are we really giving? What are we doing? What is the process? We are relinquishing ego. That's what we're doing. That is the process of prapatti. And in relinquishing ego, that is, in relinquishing the illusory self, we are thus necessarily embracing our true self. We are actually finding ourselves by relinquishing that which is not true self. That is prapatti. That is self-surrender. All right? Now let's go on to the second clause. And experiencing extreme desolation in forgetting that Supreme Godhead. This is devotion. This is devotion. This is devotion. This is love. What does it mean to love? All material love, all love that exists within this material realm is itself only a shadow reflection of that true bhakti, that true love toward God. So for that reason, in order to give us a little bit of a glimpse of what that state is like, that state of bhakti, devotional consciousness, and awareness of God in this way, we use these very imperfect but workable, very pragmatic examples. Again, being in love. The closest thing that we can experience to this bhakti is being in love. When we are in love and we are not in the presence of that person we love, we're in desolation. You know what desolation means. It's a word that you don't hear very much anymore. It's an internal state. It means being in a state in which, because you are not there before that person you love, you feel as if your existence has become a void. So much so that when that person you love is not there, you quite literally feel as if your existence has ceased. That's a powerful love. Well, this is what Narada is saying. That what is bhakti? It is a love for God such that if you forget God even momentarily, for some reason you're distracted. Other people want to forget God. You see, those who are in Maya, those who are in illusion, we have done everything to forget God. But for that person who is a bhakta, for that person who is devoted to God, if somehow, and this is theoretical, because once you are liberated, you never forget God. But in theory, if you were to forget God, even for a moment, you would feel desolated. You would feel as if your existence has ceased. Now, this is what's interesting. This is going very deeply into bhakti rasa, into theory of bhakti. Truthfully, for an individual who is experiencing full bhakti, even that desolation itself is ecstatic. Even that desolation itself is ecstatic. Thus, we can have devotion in separation from Krishna, from God. This was experienced by the gopis very specifically. This was experienced by Radharani. It's a very, very high form of bhakti. See, when we speak of bhakti, just like when we speak about any exalted spiritual state, we're not just talking about some flat two-dimensional thing. We're talking about something that has oceanic depth to it. So even when we speak about bhakti, there are many aspects of bhakti. And each aspect compounds. And then there are different flavors and different colorizations, different emotions, but in the spiritual sense that could be experienced through bhakti. One of these is indeed the desolation of union and separation, being united with God because we're separated from God. Thus, for example, you have the story of the gopis, who were the greatest of all bhaktas. They had love for God like no other. And once, to make the story very short, just to kind of play with them, when Krishna was among the gopis, he suddenly disappeared. He's just playing a game with them. And it's explained that the desolation that they experienced was oceanic. You read this in Krishna book? And it explains, how they were just kind of wandering around and not knowing what to do. But really, that was perfect samadhi. Because within even that desolation of separation, what were they experiencing? Pure love for God, because their consciousness, even in that desolation, is focused fully upon the divine. So really, even that desolation is not a negative. It's simply another aspect of bhakti, another aspect of that sweetness, that bliss of bhakti. So you see, this bhakti goes very, very deep. This is not even scratching the surface. One day, maybe, we'll talk about bhakti itself in a very, very deep sort of way. Even deeper than we have. So, this is what are the characteristics of bhakti, of devotional consciousness, in accordance with Narada himself. And then, finally, asti evam evam. Devotional consciousness is like each of these examples. Devotional consciousness is like each of these examples. Now, very important that he ends this little section in this way. You've seen this already, and you'll continue to see this, how Narada Bhakti Sutras has sections, several verses that form a section. So what we just read today, with all these verses from 15 to 20, this is one unit. This is one section. It begins with 15, talking about how there are different sages and they have different perspectives of bhakti. And now it ends on the same thought. However, conclusively, it explains, again, devotional consciousness is like each of these examples. So again, it's not that there's contention between them. Narada is making this clear. He's saying all of these examples are correct. It's not, Vyasa has his opinion and Shandilya disagrees and Gargamuni disagrees with both of them and none of them know what they're talking about. Here's my opinion. No. Narada ends very, very importantly saying these are all correct. These are all different aspects of bhakti, all of which need to be understood and practiced. So again, asti evam evam. Devotional consciousness is like each of these examples. He doesn't say only my example or this person, like each of them. They're all correct. These are all the different aspects of bhakti, and these are not the only aspects. Being necessarily succinct, because this is a sutra and it's the nature of sutra literature to be succinct, very succinct. Could he go on and give even more examples? Such and such rishi talks about bhakti from this perspective and this perspective. Yeah, he could go on and on and on. But instead, he is citing sages that are very well known. Again, maybe not so much in the West, but in the Vedic literature, these people are very well known. They are conclusive, and more, these are all very important. So if we want to understand what are the most important characteristics of devotional consciousness, look at these examples. Read these again when you have a chance, because these are of importance. So again, this is how he ends. That all of these opinions in the world are correct? No. These opinions are all correct. Devotional consciousness is like each of these examples. Okay? So again, not a radical universalism. Not all opinions are correct about bhakti. Not, anyone's opinion is correct. No, these opinions are correct. And why? Because these are acharyas, because these are rishis, because these are individuals who are authorities. And like with so much of this, of course, we can go very in depth. Believe it or not, with each of these verses, we could spend one entire class on just one verse. But necessarily, we've gone a little bit quick. But I think we'll stop there, because with verse 21, now we're going to begin a new thought, a new section that goes on for several verses. So why don't we stop there?
Is ritual worship not necessary for enlightened beings?
Good question. Yes and yes. Yes and yes. Yeah, ritual worship is indeed let's say, it's an approximation of what it means to be in the presence of God and performing devotional service. Yeah, in actuality. It's practice. It's practice for then when the real thing comes. That's why we do puja. That's why we do any form of ritual. There are all kinds of rituals. I always use puja because that's the most general one. There's abhisheka, where you have the murti and you pour various substances to wash the murti, and it's just done symbolically. Again, you're serving God. And all of the rituals that are done, they're endless, but they all have this one core essence, that the idea is that you're doing it as a meditation and as a meditational practice in order to acquaint your consciousness, reacquaint yourself to what it means to give rather than take. See, what does it mean to do service, seva? What does it mean to do service? It means that you're doing the opposite of what ego is dictating. Ego is dictating that everything you do for yourself and yourself alone. Ego, ahankara, ego, false ego, dictates that you be self-involved, only me, only me. Oh, do I look good in the mirror? Is everyone there to serve me? Oh, my interest, what am I going through today? What are my emotional states today? Etc., etc. Me, 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 me. Well, what it means to be spiritual, just even in general, but then especially when it comes to the science of puja and ritual worship, is we are practicing the opposite in such a way that even though initially we may only be doing it physically, offering some incense, and there might be a little devotion there, but still it's more just physical than anything. The idea is to keep doing that, and have that little bit of devotion grow and grow and grow to the point where one day we find ourselves doing puja, but then we come to the awareness that actually our physical body is doing nothing, that we're actually sitting in meditation. And as we look again upon the murti, it's not the murti, we realize it's Krishna himself. That is the realization that you eventually come to. One day it comes to the point where You find yourself doing puja only to realize that actually you're sitting in meditation because you had sat in meditation to begin with. You were not aiming to do puja that day. You were sitting in meditation, but you found yourself doing puja internally. And in actuality, it's your very soul itself serving God himself in complete devotion. And if someone else were to look at you, they would just see a person sitting there. But that's what's happening inside you. And it's become real. Yeah, so that's very much the idea. But then, yes, the actual ritual act of puja eventually no longer becomes necessary for a person when they reach that stage, because the puja becomes internal. All throughout the Upanishads, for people who know the Upanishadic literature very well, the Upanishadic literature is in many ways a reaction toward those individuals who live in pure ritualism, those individuals who are materialistic followers of the Vedas and who feel that yajna is everything. Just yajna, just ritual for the sake of ritual, but without devotion, without wanting to know oneself or God. But the Upanishadic sages explain in the Upanishads that eventually it comes to the point where you realize that yajna is not a physical activity. It is a sacrifice not merely of ghee into the fire, but it is a sacrifice of oneself to God. You see, so similar sort of concept. So yes, eventually it comes to the point where the sage does not need to do actual puja. They do it nonetheless because they do it as a didactic method to teach their students. Yeah. The true liberated being, in theory, needs to do nothing at that point. They don't need to even meditate. They don't need to do puja. They don't need to read any scriptures. In theory, they need to do nothing. They're liberated. But they still do that nonetheless so that their students can learn from their example. Any other questions? Please.
Isn't that any of them are more or less important than the other? Or...
Do you mean these people, or who do you mean?
Oh, sorry. I mean the different forms of devotional service.
Yes. Of all of these, what Narada says is the most important. Yeah. So what Narada actually says here in verse 19. But I, Narada, hold that the essential characteristics of devotional consciousness are prapatti, self-surrender, offering all of one's activities to the Supreme Godhead. What he's talking about is prapatti. What he's talking about is also the highest teaching of Bhagavad Gita. That's why you know that Narada is going to the very root of what is bhakti. Sarva dharmam parityajya. He's going to the very root. What is the highest teaching? Absolute self-surrender. But then he goes deeper. He explains bhakti in the second clause in this extremely interesting way. A way that at first, not understanding its full content, it almost seems like something negative. Oh, what does it mean to have bhakti? That when you're not thinking of God, you're in desolation. That sounds horrible. It almost sounds like you're kind of in a little mini hell. But no, if we understand what sort of desolation this is, this could be understood in two ways. It could be understood in the form of the individual who is still in illusion, and that when they are not thinking of God, yes, that is a negative thing. That's a bad thing. But then there is a higher way of thinking about this. Even for that being who is liberated, if in theory they were to stop thinking about God for a moment, they would be in desolation. It would be for them as if the very essence of their being were missing. In other words, this is going a little bit even deeper. Again, for the true liberated sage, forgetting about God is an impossibility. To forget about God, if you're a liberated sage, is kind of like saying that you as an eternal self lose your eternal self. It's impossible. It's an impossibility. So the second clause is very deep. It has these three levels. It's talking about the person who is in illusion, that to forget about God is terrible. Don't do it. That's the first thing Narada is saying with this desolation. So just very practical. Always remember God. Don't forget God. If you forget God, that's a terrible thing. But then, a little bit higher, For that being who is already liberated, to forget God is a desolation, but even that is a form of bhakti. Even that is a form of bhakti. But more, going a little bit even deeper than that, the true sage, in actuality, as far as the functionality of their Atman, the practical functionality of their Atman, it is impossible for them ever to forget God. To do so would be desolation. For the truly liberated being, to forget God would be akin to residing in non-existence, which is an impossibility. It would mean for the Atman to simply cease to exist, which is an impossibility. Atman, by its very nature, has necessary existence, can't go out of existence. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all of these kings. Never shall there be a time when we shall cease to be. Krishna says to Arjuna, he makes this very clear. The Atman can never cease to exist. If the Atman in its liberated state were to somehow forget God, it would be as if the Atman ceased to exist. In other words, it's impossible. It's impossible. Does that make sense? Okay. I can go deeper, actually, but I won't. Yeah, we won't go deeper than that because they'll take time. All right. Any other questions? Anything? Any questions?
I'm perfectly fine, thank you.
Okay.
If I can remember a single word of what said from about an hour, it will be enough to meditate upon for the rest of my life. So I have no questions. Thank you again, Acharya.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
The idea of puja or ritual worship is to offer oneself to God, correct?
Ultimately, yes.
Then why do we offer, say, for example, incense or flowers or any of these other things? Is it like a symbolic gesture that's meant to signify, offering oneself, or is it an exercise in sort of developing that devotional consciousness for the real thing?
Both. It's both. Yeah, it's both of those, actually. Okay. Given our present state, not even truly knowing our true self, how do we surrender that self? It's not possible. We don't know how yet. Or we're working on it. It's a lifelong process or a years-long process. Thus, what do? In substitution for that, we offer pleasant things. We offer the best of what we have. Truthfully, the idea is you offer the best of what you have. That's all the ultimate idea. In a very humble way, we offer little things. We offer incense, water, etc., things that are available to anyone, because in this way, even the poorest person can practice bhakti. See, this is what's wonderful about bhakti, is that it's not so much that it's radically egalitarian, it's radically open to anyone, even if you have nothing. But let's say you're a multi-billionaire. Well, then offer gold. Go to the temple, go to the murti, and if you're a billionaire, what are you going to do? Go to the temple and leave a little apple there? And use the excuse that, Krishna he doesn't care what's offered, so let me offer an apple. No, you're cheating. You're cheating. No, you're not being honest. You're using that as an excuse. If you have nothing, if you truly are a person in poverty, you can at least offer a little bit of water. You can offer a leaf. You can offer something. But if you are someone who truly has means, then you offer that. You offer as much as you can. Offer gold bars if that's what you have. The idea is to offer the best of what you have. In this way, you are practicing giving. Practicing giving. If you're a billionaire and you leave an apple, you're not practicing giving of yourself. Here, this is a nice story that I haven't told in a long time that illustrates this perfectly. And I'll tell the story. Those who've been with me for a very long time, you've heard this story. But I don't think I've told this in quite a long time. As an example, there was a person who was very, very wealthy, very wealthy. You know, he had millions of dollars. And despite the fact that he was wealthy, he was also greedy. He didn't want to be greedy. He knew it was a bad thing. But he was so greedy to the point where he found it impossible to even give a little bit of money, even give some coins to a beggar or anything like that. But one thing that was good about him was that he was at least trying to be spiritual. And one day he found himself in a temple courtyard, and there is a sage who was there teaching. And he sits and he listens to the sage, and he's very moved. And then finally he goes up to the sage at the end of his discourse, and he explains his problem. He says, "Sir, I have this problem within me. I just have this inward greed. And I know it's horrible, but even though I'm very wealthy, I can't give anything to anyone out of charity. I can't. I don't want to be like this. I know this is horrible. It's just going to give me bad karma. I won't be able to be spiritual. What do I do?" And the sage says, yes, I can help you with this. I can help you with this. This is what I want you to do. I want you to go to places where there are lots of ashes. Everywhere, wherever you find piles of ashes. I want you to bring a bag with you, a big bag. Fill that bag with ashes, and then meet me in the town square. And of course, the rich man is very confused. What? You want me to do what? All right, but he trusts the sage because he can tell, oh, this person is for real. So he does that, and he comes to the town square with a massive bag of ashes, and he meets the sage there. And it's a busy place. There are people scurrying to and fro and different things happening. And the man says, all right, sir, I am here now. What do I do? And the sage explains to him, all right, this is what I want you to do. I want you now to sit here with this bag of ashes next to you. And anyone who walks your way, anyone who walks by you, I want you to stop them and say, "Sir, please stop. I have something for you." And I want you to reach into your bag of ashes and give it to them. And the man is very confused. And he says to the sage, in his little bit of skepticism, he says, "Sir, because I know you are a saint, I will do this. But why am I doing this?" And the sage explains, because in this way, at least you will give your hand a practice in giving. You will give your hand a practice. And in time, you will be able to give greater things. And then the man understood that was his sadhana that he had to do. That was his practice. He couldn't give away wealth. He just couldn't make himself do it. All right, give away something that's not wealth. But at least you're giving. At least you're practicing with that hand, giving. And then eventually it gets to the point where you can give truly valuable things. So that's the idea of sadhana. And sometimes, I don't think this is the case for everyone here, but sometimes I can imagine to some people, some things might seem silly. Oh, why do you have those little dolls there on that altar, and what are you doing? You're offering what? To an outside observer, it can seem like a silly thing. It's not. We're giving ourselves practice for the real thing. Yes?
When you mentioned, when you're offering food and you also think of Agni, because then Agni offers the food too. Is that really good to do? Is that just beneficial for digestion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, practically, yes, it is beneficial for digestion as well. Agni is the god of fire. Agni serves many purposes, including personification of fire itself, but especially sacred fire and productive fire. Fire can be either productive or it can be destructive, as we know. Agni is especially productive fire. Thus, when we're doing yajna, that flame that's there is Agni as the physical form, but the substance of the flame itself, the spiritual aspect that we are not seeing, is the mouth of Vishnu. Agni also becomes becomes manifest within the belly of living beings as well as that digestive fire. Thus, Agni is there in the practical form, that is, the form itself. See, form and substance. Aristotelian form and substance. Agni is there as the form, that which produces that fire of digestion, but in actuality, the substance is that is also the mouth of Vishnu, the mouth of God. Thus, as we're eating, yes, if we in a way meditate upon this, that yes, as I'm eating, I'm actually offering. Imagine that. How contradictory that sounds. I am offering by eating. By taking food into even my very own mouth. I am not doing this merely to enjoy selfishly. But even in eating and chewing the food and experiencing the taste and the food going down, giving me nutrition, etc., even that I am doing as a meditative offering unto the divine, such that when I eat, the food goes down. It is the physical aspect is digested by Agni, but then spiritually, the pranic aspect of that food substance is being eaten, consumed by the very mouth of God. So in a way, when I eat and I meditate in this way, even that is an offering to God. I am not feeding me, I am feeding God. Does God need to be fed? Of course not. But that's the meditation. Is that amazing? So there's that correspondence both in the yagya but also the digestive fire. That both the form is Agni, but then the substance within that form is Vishnu, is God, digesting what we are giving when we are offering things in yagya, when we are even eating. That's the correspondence. So, Vedic spirituality. Is this deep enough?